Hello, Chesser here. So let's talk about the Timeless January 10th Open hosted by Novos. Thank you to Novos for having the initiative to start tournaments for Timeless. So this one had, I think, 50 players. This one had 53 players in it. And what won the whole tournament was Mono Black Reanimator. This is just basically the Necro Reanimator deck. So your usual Sorin Elenda with Necro deck. Congrats to Julio or Julio for winning the tournament. And the top 8 is actually dominated by Mono Black. Orzhov Reanimator, this one was Miss Min's version. It is kind of a mid-rangey take of the deck. It's still a Necro Potence deck, but it's not leaning as hard on that. And there was one mono red prison deck that made it. Looking at their record, that's actually nuts. They won like 5 games against the Necropotence deck. And this is a deck without counter spells, just Chalice and Disruptor Flute, I guess. And we are here. We ended up at 11. We went 4 and 2. We got bubbled out of top 8. I actually lost to Mistmin with the Orzhov Reanimator deck and Ollie on the Necro Reanimator deck. This video format is a bit different. We're just going to go over and review the my run of this tournament, because I did record clips, or I did record the games for the actual tournament. I just wasn't able to commentate on it since I had a guest over at that time. And I ran Esper with Baleful Tricks and Flare of Denial. This is basically just the ladder deck that I was using prior to the tournament. I didn't really try to metagame or try to adjust to the expected meta. But if I did, I would still have it wrong, because I was expecting a lot of energy. So what I would have done is probably make this deck better against energy. And that's by putting some Stern Scoldings in the main and having the Orcish Bowmasters in here instead of the sideboard. But it turned out to be great, because this configuration of the deck is more generally applicable to an unknown meta. And this is better against the Necro decks actually, because you do have Flare of Denial and Force of Negation in the main, instead of just having the 3 Force of Negation and extra removal spells in here. So Strix is great, I think. So Strix is great because it works with Flare of Denial, and it is a great blocker against the Goyfs running around, Barogoyf or Pyrogoyf. Just take your pick. And it even deals with creatures like Hydroponics Architect, Psychic Frog, Tameo in the mirror. So I went for this meta call in the ladder because I was facing a lot of mono black and mono red stompy decks. And this being 2 mana is actually relevant against mono red because that way you can pretty much ignore Chalice for a while until you find your prismatic ending. And you still have access to Flare of Denial and Force of Negation because these are 3 mana spells. But anyway, going back to the tournament, our first matchup was Mono Black Scam. This was Geckos. They actually ended up top 5. It's a pretty straightforward deck. Barragoy Grief, Dark Ritual Reanimate. They have the One Ring and Palantir. 5 removal spells in the main. And for the sideboard, I think they were expecting fair matchups. They have a lot of opposition agents, cut downs, dismember, a lot more removal spells. So let's watch the gameplay. I won the die roll. We went first. So I kept this hand on the back of Psychic Frog. I knew Geckos was on a fair game plan, so I wasn't really that afraid of anything except a turn 1 ring, so I think this was a good keep. Strip Mine is also relevant because we are on the play. Turn 1, I would just ponder for Force of Negation probably or a removal spell. You can use turn 1 as a setup turn. And I'm going to fetch... I think about what fetching Watery Grave here, but I fetch Hollowed Fountain here instead. Because if I need to strip mine next turn, I want to be able to play Swords to Plowshares too. And if I'm not going to play Strip Mine this turn, I would just deploy Frog. But them holding up Swamp here means that they probably have a removal spell. So I go ahead and Strip Mine this first, then going to the second main to cast my Tameo, which essentially just wastes their mana for that turn because they were holding up removal spell for that turn, or I assume they have the removal spell. Alright, and they did in fact have the removal spell here. And instead of playing the Hydroponics Architect here, I'm just going to play Psychic Frog to be mana efficient. I don't think I'm going to Flare of Denial or anything next turn anyway. The worst that could happen is a land drop into One Ring, but land drop, Dark Ritual into One Ring. But I'll take my chances here. Okay, so it turns out to be fine because they had the grief to strip us off the Flare of Denial anyway. There's a Strip Mine. And there's another removal spell. They griefed first so probably that I can't discard my whole hand to Frog. It's a good play, but we did end up drawing another architect, which can just overwhelm them. I decided to flare this Bargoyf because I was ahead on board anyway. This hydroponics architect will go a long way. And I noticed that they only have one black source at this point. So I'm just going to strip them off that black source. And there's no rush to draw with hydroponics architect here. I want to ensure that I'll be able to draw multiple cards off the fetch there. I'm keeping Strix on top and just passing the turn here. We can flip Tameo using the fetch land next turn. So I have 3 hydroponics triggers stacked already. And I want that land because they are presenting 2 strip mines here. So we just fetch for a fetch land, flip Tameo. And at this point, I don't think they can recover. There's a Chrome Mox. And we just went ahead and tried to check if we can find a counter spell here. There's a Dark Ritual. And there's a One Ring. And this is pretty much my last shot at a forest. So, alright. We draw into the forest. And that's basically the game. So post board, I've been doing this. I've been cutting strip mines on the draw. Especially against these types of decks with Chrome Mox because they don't really care about getting stripped. Especially with Dark Ritual. They just put out a lot of bombs early. So instead, I'm just going to keep Force of Negation and Flares. Basically more interaction spells instead of the strip mine. The land count is still functional because it still has, I think, 17 or 18 blue sources in total. I don't think I need the surgical. It only hits reanimate. But I do want to make room for it somehow, but I remember not forcing it. Yeah. Okay, on the draw, this is a nice hand. We have Force of Negation. And post board, we do have to remember that they have opposition agents, so Hollowed Fountain in the hand is really great because our removal spells are white. So I'm just going to keep this. We have 2 main reasons to keep this hand. The first one is Force and the second one is the Hollowed Fountain. They go for Grief as their first play. I remember thinking that the force probably gets taken away here, and I should just proactively fetch for a black source on turn 1. Because I really wanted to play around opposition agent this game. And them taking Orcish Bowmasters there felt like they weren't gonna jam something like Palantir here. So just go ahead and Force of Negation that. And again, I am playing around opposition agent here. So I fetch it proactively. And luckily, my opponent doesn't have a second land. They were really banking on that Dark Ritual there. And very important here is that they are not receiving priority, which means they don't have Bowmasters in hand. And that means I can just freely Treasure Cruise here. So it's really a giveaway of the arena client that you have to look out for when trying to spike these games. And there's a Bargoyf. We have double Baleful Strix here. And I have to be wary of them top decking an Orcish Bowmasters at this point, so we are just going to play out the second Strix. I was thinking about playing Psychic Frog just to be proactive, but I feel like I want to draw into a Force or a Flare this turn anyway, because they might just have land into One Ring. And now they can't attack into that. They decide to take me off white here. And I'm just going to hold back the Strix forever here. It's just gonna block the Barrow forever. Alright, and since I'm not casting any of the removal spells, I'm just going to hide them on the top of my library. You also have the Force now for a One Ring. So here the Baleful Strix is really doing work. The Barrogoyfs are not able to attack into it. And basically I just gain a huge advantage here by attacking with Psychic Frog. And I do discard the Ponders here, or yeah, I discard Treasure Cruise because I am using Psychic Frog as a flyer. So you want to be as aggressive as possible with Psychic Frog against these matchups because you don't want them to draw out of it. And I'm guessing they're just attacking here for the life gain. They play the Trawler here. And I don't really care about that. We are just gonna ponder for a white source later on. I think I attack here because I'm fine with trading them trading one card for their trawler. And again, I'm gonna play around opposition agent by proactively fetching the hallowed fountain. And while I'm at it, I'm just gonna use it to remove the trawler. And at this point, I'm just discarding the cantrips. I just want a faster clock again, so that they can't draw out of it. And here, I'm just gonna flip Tameo, preserve my life total this way. We can have Orcish Bowmasters, but we have Swords to Plowshares. There's a reanimate. We are just gonna force that. And yeah, that's basically game. So pretty straightforward, good showing for Strix there. Now, the second matchup was against Mono Blue Merfolk. And what's interesting about this list is that they seem to be a best of one gamer. They only have 7 cards in the sideboard. So, actually, this looks like a nightmare for Necro Reanimator to deal with because they have a miscolor here. Let me pull that up. So until end of turn, if a non-token creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, exile it instead. This basically counters Sorin into Elenda or reanimate Atraxa. So it was really nice tech from the Merfolk player. And you have things like the Shauna's Tidebinder to cancel out ATBs, the Vodalcan Hexcatcher to counter non-creature spells. And we even have a lock element here with Harbinger. And that is all backed up by a bunch of counter magic. So they won the die roll here. This hand is not keepable. We decide to mull it, and the second hand is better. And since they are playing Merfolk, I think I was deciding of bottoming Flare of Denial here. I don't remember why I bottom Ponder instead. I think I figured I didn't have time to cast Ponder because I had Architect and Psychic Frog. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. And in hindsight, I was playing around Stifle too much, I think. And they play Master of the Trident. We try to search for a removal spell. And I think I'm making a lot of misplays this game, actually. I removed Tamio from my hand I think that is good in this matchup, but alright, it's whatever. And here I'm just gonna play out Psychic Frog. They sack it with Flare of Denial. And I just play out Tameo. And them holding up 3 mana here feels like they are holding up Tishana's Tidebinder. So I am just gonna Swords to Plowshares this one. The better play for at this point actually is to ponder first if I suspect Tishana's Tidebinder, so that I had already drawn one card for the turn. And now if... Oh no, that doesn't work because Tameo essentially has no abilities. So that's still correct. This play is still correct. And then after we flip the Tameo, or I think I decide against it. Maybe. I don't really recall this match. Yeah, Psychic Frog is important in this matchup. Once you get that down, they can't remove it. That is one way to stop Psychic Frog, so I decide to Flare of Denial this one. And it's also an opportunity to use Flare of Denial. And now I have Swords to Plowshares for the Master of the Pearl Trident. And I just trade the Hydroponics Architect here. I'm reserving my Swords to Plowshares here because they do play Harbinger. And that's basically the game. They just flood out at this point. And they top deck Harbinger, but it gets swords. And against this matchup, we just want the sweepers, the removal spells. Stern Scolding could be useful even though they have Cavern of Souls. But at this point, we don't really have slots for it unless we trim down on Strip Mines. And I think it's fine to trim down on Strip Mines at this point because we are on the draw. And I keep this hand because it has Psychic Frog, it has a removal spell. It's just generally great hand. And here I hold up removal. Hold on. Yeah, this is probably another misplay from me. A better play would have been just fetch a black source, then ponder. Find the black source anyway. so that's fine. And since this is game 2, I don't think I needed to play around Force of Negation here. Another mistake. And now the game is slowly slipping away from me here. Yep, they were just able to aggro me out here. I think I went with no changes. I like with how I boarded. I moved that hand because it was full of cantrips. I just want to have a proactive hand like this. Hydroponics Architect actually try kinda counters Harbinger, because if it hits a hollowed fountain or a watery grave, it is counted as a basic. So you still get to use the white and black sources if you hit it with the Architect. Okay. Yeah, I remember this being gloomy because I get brainstorm locked for a while. Thankfully, I think my opponent's hand was pretty slow. And they did play around the hallowed fountain here. I think they had Harbinger in hand. They were thinking of playing it out but saw that I had white up. That's why at this point I didn't attack here because it could also be Tishana's Tidebinder, but I did not want to be forced to Swords to Plowshares that one. So I did just skip the turn. And there they reveal the Harbinger in hand. And I don't attempt to cast Ponder here because they could just counter it with Mana Drain. And now I'm just gonna try to Swords Plowshares this Harbinger. But they do have the counterplay of having Flare of Denial if they have that. And they did have that. So it's really grim at this point. We decided to go ahead and ponder. And I'm just basically relying on the Stern Scolding here. They just have 3 power on board, so the Lords are an instant counter. And now I have a couple of creatures to block the Harbinger or Mistcaller. And this is sort of mopey. This just goes on. Pretty sure I should have just lost this game. But luckily they flooded out. But yeah, it's a pretty nice deck. So the next one is up against Mistmin. Let's take a quick look at their deck. We have Orzhov Reanimator. So Dark Ritual, Sorin, Elenda, and Tomb Reanimate is in here. They have Necropotence. And what's unique about their list is that they have Ephemerate, Solitude. They actually have a lot of removal in this deck. Because post board they have Prismatic Ending, Swords to Plowshares. They even have Pest Control in here and Path of Peril. It's really an interesting take on Necro Reanimator. And one thing that I should have clocked here is that they weren't playing Chrome Mox. But going into the matches, I really just thought it was a mulligan simulator. And I think that cost me this match. So game 1, I think this hand is appropriate enough. You don't have to force and have the Force of Negation in hand in game 1 against these decks. Remember, we are just running 3 copies of those. It's unrealistic to try to mulligan for that on turn 0. Sometimes you just have to accept that the minimum is you have turn 1 interaction. And we do end up having that. I think this is the best part of their deck against mine. Because they are able to remove my creatures, turning off the Flare of Denial. And they can just play whatever payoff they have. And that Ephemerate actually will set me back because now I can play a creature here. They don't make a land drop, I think. And we just strip them off mana here. Double block the Solitude. There's the Dark Ritual. We Force of Negation the Necromancy. Keeping up Flare of Denial. And from here we just bury them in cards. So we steal game 1. But the sideboard plan here is a bit wonky for Orzhov Reanimator because I really was in the mindset of just boarding in like it was Necro Reanimator. But in reality, they are playing a lot more creatures. They have Barrogoyfs. So Commandeer probably could be cut here. Strix was actually pretty important. So in hindsight, I think I didn't board correctly here. And That 7 was atrocious. This was better. They go for Dark Ritual. I was expecting a Necro here or a Soren. But instead we got Bargoyf. So having that kind of juke is actually pretty good into mono blue. Or, yeah, into blue decks in general. And I counter this one because they might have the second Bargoyf. And at this point, I'm just buried in cards. So post board going into it, I think a Toxic Deluge is acceptable. But again, I still don't clock that they don't have Chrome Mox or Necro Dominance. And I was just looking for hands that had Force of Negation in them. I mulled to 5 and failed to find a Force or even Commandeer or even Flare and a blue creature. So the hand is pretty unfortunate. We ponder, we don't find the land. And I think I don't find the land for a while here. We play Tameo. Get swords. We play Troll. And I think I'm forced to use the Force of Negation here. Oh no, they just have Grief into Ephemerate. Right. Yeah, so interesting take on the deck. And if they have Necro here, it's still good. Or even Sorin Alinda. So I just lose from here. Yeah, so this deck in particular was better into mine compared to Necro Reanimator. Okay, so next up is Mono Black Reanimator. That's Ollie. So this is pretty much what I expected to face for the Necropotence decks. So they just have... They are running the Tendrils version of the deck. We have Necrodominance, Necropotence, Sacrifice. Interesting, there's only 3 Sorens here. So this is arguably the best deck of the format right now. And I did lose to it 2-0. So let's check out the games. So right off the bat, I win the die roll, but I did have to mulligan to Oblivion here. They kept a 7. Keep that in mind. And I had to keep 4. And they had the Grief opener too. So this is really rough. I think I just didn't have a chance for this game 1 at all. It's a pretty fast game. And my sideboard plan for this is just to cut the strip mines and add the interaction spells. Add 1 more force. We have to make room for commandeers and maybe even stern scolding. We got a treasure cruise because you don't really have time to cast treasure cruise against this deck unless it's later on in the game. So again, now we have a better hand here. We have turn 1 interaction. What's missing here is the threat. What was the first hand? Can't remember the first hand. Okay, the first hand was no interaction. The second hand was better. It just didn't have a threat here. And again, our opponent kept 7 here. There's Entomb. I think about countering the Entomb, but they are only running 4 reanimates. So I don't think the odds are that great. So I decide to go against it. So they had Vexing Bobble into reanimate here. I counter the reanimate. And next turn I have Flare Up. And I don't think I hold Flare Up here because I really need to get a threat going. I can't just play scared all the time. And this was a risk, but I have to flare that or I lose. And now I run out of interaction. And they just managed to have back-to-back payoffs here. They did indeed have the double reanimate. So we just lost here. They were able to overwhelm this hand. So that's basically this matchup. It really depends on how well you do in your mulligan phase. But the good thing about the Necro decks now is that they can keep a lot more 7s compared to back then when it was still Black-White Belcher, where it felt like they were constantly mulling to 4 or 5 or even 3. So yeah, we lose this matchup, which is unfortunate. I really thought that it was one of the better ones. For the next match, I think we have... Yeah, it was Esper Tempo. It's basically the mirror. They were on a Deathrite Shaman version of the deck. Also 2 Bowmasters in the main. They have Prismatic Ending, Dismember. So a more balanced version of... Not really more balanced, but a different take. Or I would say this is more inclined to beat fair matchups than unfair ones. So they're going first, which is pretty bad for us. We keep this hand. This is nice. We have swords. We have the Bowmasters. So since they are running for Force of Negations, we are just gonna go ahead and use swords on their upkeep. I almost missed that. They play Tamio. And now I think about playing Frog here or just going for the Bowmasters. I decide to go for the Bowmasters here because I can protect it with Force of Negation. They ponder, so we're just gonna use this opportunity to force a removal spells onto the Bowmasters. We play Hydro. Now we play Psychic Frog and I decide to go the aggro route. They are at 11. We take them off white here. Which means they have to fetch and shock to remove the Bowmasters or a frog. So they block like this. We get a free card. And I think I would just hold up Flare of Denial here. And I think at this point they just saw no way out. Because we have Orcish Bowmasters and Psychic Frog in play. And on the draw, we don't want a lot of strip mines. Or strip mines are less effective on the draw. So we take them out in favor of more interaction. And we remove flares and forces because they are 2-for-1s. And this hand is really great. We have removal spells, we have the threats. This looks like a Bowmasters. So I think I still decide to go for Tameo and try to hold up Brainstorm. A better play might have been to strip mine the white source and then play Tameo. But if I strip mine here, they just play out the Bowmasters. And I don't want to flip Tameo in response because they just get to attack it. Now they're free to remove the Tameo at this point. That right shaman is a concern. I try to take it slow here. Oh no, I actually used this member. I dismembered the shaman because I did want to reserve the Swords to Plowshares to Orcish Bowmasters. Just in case this game goes long. I want that gone out of their graveyard. And now it's looking great at this point. We have the Stern Scolding. And we have the Bowmasters next turn. Go ahead and Brainstorm. Now the Bowmasters doesn't look that great anymore. We ponder for a threat here. And the Black Source. I think I should have just blocked here. And since I don't have access to black now, I pretty much just die here. Yep, and that's the end of me. I don't think I changed much here, even though I'm on the play. Sometimes I would want strip mines depending on how the opponent built their deck. So if I see that they are a bit more greedy on lands, I might have ran the full force strip mines. But this one is running a relatively high land count and they are playing that right shaman. And this hand is great because it has Hydroponics Architect and a couple of dismembers. And now I have the choice here to just insta-flip the Tamayo, but our opponent does play Esper, so they have Prismatic Ending. And I don't really want to risk that dying to just a Prismatic Ending. Swords here is nice. They have the Spell Pierce for the Brainstorm. Solid 2 for 2 trade here. Now those are great cards to see here. Unless they have Treasure Cruise. And here I put an upkeep stop because I want to be able to control what they play this turn. Stripping them off black here forces them to think about playing Bowmasters on their upkeep. Which means I'm free to just turn Scolding that right away. Frog, I can dismember. And at this point we are at the danger zone because they can just pop a Treasure Cruise at this point. So I'm thinking of bluffing an Orcish Bowmasters, or if I should just get lures to hand. I think at this point bluffing won't do you wonders. You just need to go for the play that maximizes your mana. Because if they jammed Treasure Cruise into my open mana, then I practically just lost the game. Okay, so we have answers to both of those. And since they are tapped out right now, I really want to cast that Treasure Cruise. And I think I allowed them to have a turn with the Hydroponics Architect here. Oh no, instead I draw into Strip Mine. I dismember this and have Stern Scolding up, which is nice. We just Scolding the Psychic Frog. And the reason why we did that is because we can choke them on mana here. Meaning they just play lures if they want to next turn without any follow-ups. And now I'm under the assumption of, or I'm trying to just prevent them from top decking Treasure Cruise. So I need to hold up this Bowmasters at this point. And if it gets countered, I have Lurus into Bowmasters as a play. They crack a clue, so we play Bowmasters. If it gets scolding, then we can just replay it with Lurus. And at this point, they're taking too much pressure. They can't Swords to Plowshares anymore because they are at 3. And we basically just win from here. And the last match is against Sultai Creature Toolbox. This is the deck. It's actually a Yorion deck, which is interesting. It has Nadu. It's just basically all creatures, which is a nightmare for my deck with 4 Force of Negation. Well, it's actually okay because they are running. I remember, yeah, here they have Natural Orders and Green Sun's Zenith, so the Force of Negation isn't completely dead here. So I want the die roll, I keep a hand with a removal spell and Hydroponics Architect. Hydroponics Architect on the play puts me into a favorite here. No, I just attack first. And I will play out the Baleful Strix here. My only concern here is Bowmasters. I'm guessing they're getting Bowmasters here. And I just wanted to take out the 2 lands out of my hand, so I went for this play instead. And I thought I might high roll into a Flare of Denial, so I took that risk. Didn't pay off. So now they get to kill my Hydroponics Architect, which I think is fine. I've drawn a lot of cards out of it. Baleful Strix can deal with that Psychic Frog. I don't remember why I cracked this Flooded Strand. Yeah, I don't remember why I did that at all. But anyway, there's my own Bowmasters. Then another Strix. Now I have Flare of Denial and Force of Negation up. I can counter a Nadu or counter a Green Sun's Zenith for 1. I know I countered this because this was threatening to be a Sylvan Safekeeper or something. They seem to be stuck on lands here, and I have a Strip Mine in play. I trade with my Bowmasters here because they aren't really drawing any cards. They're not a Brainstorm Ponder deck. And Strip Mine here screws them out of mana completely. And I just get back Lurus. And I pull so far ahead. Basically a non-game. Now against their deck full of creatures, I just want Toxic Deluge, Prismatic Ending. Force of Negation is cut. And I'm just, at this point, I'm just looking for additional slots to take out. I think I remove the Strip Mines completely because they are playing that right Shaman. But at the same time, I could take them off the expensive spells. But again, I am on the draw here, so I think it makes sense to cut all of them. And I decide to go for Toxic Deluge instead of the third Bowmasters. This hand is fine but pretty landlight. Our opponent is not playing Strip Mines, by the way. And I don't ponder here just to deny them of the Deathrite Shaman activation. Which could be completely wrong. They just go for Nadu here. We have Baleful Strix to try and block that one. Okay. The Spring Heart there is problematic. So at this point, the board is getting pretty full. And I think my best chance here is to attack with Psychic Frog. We can use Turn Scolding on that, so I do. And we're trying to look for Toxic Deluge at this point. Yeah, I was gonna go for Treasure Cruise here. I decide... Not sure if I decide to play Architect here. Don't think so. because I am looking for Deluge. I just denied them of the extra mana here because it might be relevant, especially with Spring Heart non-Tuku on play. They just go for very zone guard. And there's the Deluge. I think I just attack here first. Oh, okay. I don't actually attack first. That was a mistake, I guess. Yeah, that was a mistake. But it did... It did kill the Death Shaman, which means the Spring Heart non-Tuku is now exposed. So there's that. And at this point, they overcommit. I just let them overcommit here. Now that I think about it, a Thoughtseize here could have gotten me killed. But they don't. So we just kill everything on the board. And that's the game. And yeah, even if we went 4-2, unfortunately our breakers were not that great. And we actually lost to the Necropotent decks. So I guess there is work to be done on my plan against that deck, because I do think there are some holes in the plan. Like maybe I'm not running enough free interaction. I know I have flares, but I don't have Thoughtseize in here. Thoughtseize is great if your plan is, your opponent's plan is to try and strip your hand out of interaction. Because if you have Thoughtseize, you can just take away the payoffs, and you know when to play your threats. You get a lot of information basically. So yeah, thanks to Novos for hosting this one. That was my run, and I think I would have to revise this list to better target the reanimator decks, but as of now, I'm confident that this deck can deal with any random deck that you might face. So that's pretty much step 1 for a good deck. Yeah, thanks for watching.